While they set that up, I want to specifically thank His Excellency Ambassador Paul Garnier, Ambassador of Switzerland to Egypt, for the tremendous amount of support and effort that has been given to us throughout the past year in putting this conference together. I'd like to thank Sabina, who has been an integral part of supporting us. And today we had planned to have Mr. John McCarthy, who's the publisher of the Arabic version of the Swiss-made book, who unfortunately will not be able to be with us here today, but we have His Excellency Ambassador Paul Garnier that would be able to give us a little bit of an insight to it. So Your Excellency Ambassador Paul Garnier, if you can please join me on the stage. Your Excellency Ambassador Laura-Debraise, Ambassador of Finland to Egypt, if you can join me on the stage, and Her Excellency Ambassador Sibille, CARTIER, Ambassador of Belgium to Egypt, if you may please join me on the stage. Until Dina joins us, let me please get to the point and start. Number one, thank you very much, Your Excellencies, for your patience, having postponed this event twice in the past month. We would have preferred for it to be in March, to integrate within the whole atmosphere of our recently held presidential elections. But on that note, competitiveness can be discussed at any time as long as the report is not out for 2018-2017. So I thank you very much for your patience and for being with us. And I will start with the #1 most competitive nation in the world, Ambassador Paul. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you again for your support and for the support of the Swiss Egyptian Business Association and the support of your embassy in helping us to, how can we say, enhance the competitiveness dialogue in Egypt and to learn from your experiences. Now, we had planned to have the session with James and John prior to talk about Swiss-made, and what I would like for you to do is really touch upon the brilliance of Switzerland's competitiveness. In the past, I believe, 6 or 9 years, you have consistently been #1 on the Global Competitiveness Index, and that's not because it's being produced by the World Economic Forum. It's because you have been able to put together and formulate the right policies that would make such a small nation, a landlocked nation, so incredibly competitive. So, Your Excellency, in general, your opinion on why and how does Switzerland continue to be such a competitive nation despite some of the disadvantages that it has as being a landlocked country, small population, limited resources? Please.
Well, thank you very much, Ashraf, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be in this place, in Smart Village, in this very modern and high-tech place that is looking at competitiveness. This is very important. Good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be able to interact today. Well, on your main question, I think you have said it. Yes, we have a competitive advantage because the World Economic Forum is based in Switzerland, but it's not the explanation for everything, and I agree with you. And it is true that this book that we were intending to have presented today is a quite interesting book, and we have now here in the Egyptian market Arabic versions of this book called Swiss-made, as you have mentioned, and it shows the experiences of several Swiss companies and how they were able to become so competitive and to become so important in the global market. And this is probably one one important aspect of Switzerland is that there is this opening of Switzerland to the people and to the world in general, that has allowed Switzerland also to benefit from people that were actually coming from outside. And if you look at the book, you will see that several of our big companies were actually started also with some people coming from other countries with ideas, with new ideas, and which they were able to develop. Now, Switzerland, world most competitive nation. I have just mentioning this point of the openness of the country. This is really something that is very important. It is also due in some way to our geographical location. Of course, we are at the in the middle of Europe, with being at the crossroads of different countries and the trade streams, and also this openness is something, and I'm sure Belgium and Finland will say the same, is something that is an obligation when you're a relatively small country without too many natural resources. Actually, in Switzerland, you only have water, rocks, and salt as natural resources. So you really need to invest on different in different areas, and especially you have to invest on the people, and you have to invest on, of course, people that will make it possible for the products that we produce but that are not based on natural resources to be exported. So the human capital is what is extremely important, and where Switzerland has had to invest and will continue to invest. The people are going to create the innovation that will make it possible for the added value for export. And this leads me to a third point, which is once again that you need innovation, and for innovation to take place, it doesn't happen in isolation. And for that, you need an enabling environment. You need what we call framework conditions. And this is, I think, something that in Switzerland has always been very important. Framework conditions, infrastructure, macroeconomic stability, political stability, and as much as possible, the state creating the conditions for the companies to operate and to be competitive. It's not a system where you are going to have the state behind every company and supporting every company. No, it's just you create the environment, and then the company can compete. So here you also have a difference between creating competition and the conditions for competitions, with a difference to competitiveness that sometimes is linked also to elements that you cannot change. Egypt has a lot of elements for competitiveness. We just saw, as being at the crossroads of the main trade routes, as having this Suez Canal, as having very relatively low wages and everything. So Egypt has a lot of competitiveness advantages. But what Switzerland focuses on is on developing competition and developing as much as possible the competitiveness advantages that we have, because there are several that we don't have and we cannot do anything about it. So that would say, those 4 points would be for me the main explanation for the good ranking of Switzerland in terms of competition.
So we look at a major emphasis on the private sector. This is really the let's say, the platform to create a competitive environment is a strong private sector and strong small medium enterprises. But also one of the things that Switzerland is strong at, not the best at, Finland is, and that is education. And that will bring me to you, Your Excellency. We heard this morning Dr. Nur talking about the education fund, and we have been hearing on the Egyptian news in the past couple of days what some might find controversial, others might find moving in the right direction. There's a change in the approach of the curriculum of primary education, in introducing new technologies, tabs, moving away from the regular problematic curriculum that we had before. And in a lot of meetings that I've attended, the word Finland always comes up, that they came back to you, looked at some of the examples that you have in running your education system. They visited the United States, and they're really trying to learn from these experiences. And I believe that there will be visits of our education ministers and people within that sector to Finland also to gain experiences. Now, my point is, some people feel that it's controversial, it's very difficult because we can't implement what Finland is doing here in Egypt. It cannot be a copy and paste. How do you see, Your Excellency, what makes Finland continuously strong and most competitive nation in terms of education? And how can we as Egyptians in this transition period of our education system learn from these experiences and be able to localize it and implement them effectively in Egypt?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here, and it's really an honor to be here talking to you. Yes, education in Finland is a very important issue, and we are continuously talking about it, and we are being asked what has made Finnish education so good. The main point of Finnish education is that it's our own. We have made our own vision of education, which is not based on something which had existed already. Of course, in the classroom, we use lots of same methods as everywhere in the world, but the whole concept of education, which is based in Finland, to giving same education to everybody, to the opportunity to learn well to everybody, and to combine it to creativity and innovation. And the fact is, yes, it's some of our gurus for education, they say that, confirm that education reforms, they travel very badly. It's not, because the basic starting point should be always your own needs, your own culture. But then building on that, and this kind of experience that we have had, we are ready to share it. And we do hope that we have the possibility to have a visit from Egypt's Minister of Education. We have been working on it to get acquainted what we are doing. The second thing is that this kind of a process is never finished. We have to be able to follow the developments in the world. We have to adjust our ways of doing things, and provide the children the possibilities to adapt to the modern world. And in this connection, I cannot prevent myself of telling you how by accident, I met yesterday a visiting professor from Finland, who was here in Cairo, a professor for future studies. And I was given an opportunity to follow her lecture in IDSC, because Egypt is very interested also in future studies. And I think this is very, well, first of all, what she was emphasizing in this lecture, that why Finland is very good in future studies, is based also on the fact that we have good education system. But but they are combined to each other. So our society is also very forward-looking. We are a futures-oriented society. So we are looking forward and analyzing possible scenarios and preferable scenarios and trying to act beforehand, also in our educational system. So I do think that these are very important factors in
some people, Your Excellency, when we talk about Switzerland and we say that it has a about Finland and we say it has a very, very efficient education system, the misperception is that everybody's a doctor and everybody's an engineer and everybody's a banker and everybody's a lawyer. With a small population, how do you balance between that the need for vocational trained jobs and higher education in terms of, becoming a doctor or a lawyer and so on and so on? There's always this misconception. So how do you balance that on such a small population and still remain number one?
Well, the important thing that there is this dialogue between the private sector, well, of course, with the government, but the education has to respond to the needs of the society, the needs of the private sector, so that we cannot afford wasting people, the talents of people, for educating them for something which there is no need. And of course, another thing is to take care that there is a continuous educational possibilities, that sometimes it just happens that certain professions, the opportunities will not be any more available. So there has to be means and ways to give training, education to these people to have perhaps a new profession.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Then we go to Belgium, 20th most competitive nation in the world. And with Belgium, I see some inconsistencies. By performing very well, the 20th is still a great rank considering the fact that Egypt is 100. But then I see, 44 in the labor market efficiency, for example. And we look at these discrepancies and we think to ourselves, why would Belgium, being, basically central in Europe with such great access to the European Union and a lot of other markets in Africa as well, where does the deficiency of, or I can't say deficiency because still 44 is not humongously bad, but one of your worst performing pillars. How do you work to improve, or the reasons why you are 44, and how do you work to improve the labor market efficiency at this period of time in Europe?
I think the first element that you mentioned is indeed, just as my colleague said, competitivity or success is not a state, it's not a situation, it's something that you continue to work on and that you have to adapt to circumstances. And so I think that's the most important part, and this is where, somehow all this counting and numbers can somehow give you a support in indicating where you have to focus on. So I think, indeed, and the OECD was also, somehow pointing Belgium this question of the labor market efficiency, and we are really working on it now. We have defined, this current government has been, nominated as first in terms of reform in government because of all the tax shifts that has been done in terms of allowing a more fluidity of the market, giving the possibility for private enterprises to focus on to have an easier access to people. And then also, we are working on the strength we have already, which is, I think, the first one is, of course, people. As Paul, it starts there, and it's the goal as well. So we have a very strong education system and health system, and we have the highest productivity in the world. So I think it's just trying to, move the line between what the people are and how you can facilitating the access both ways between enterprises and people's assets.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now we're seeing specific trend. I'm not going to say a total shift, but there is a specific trend, at least from the United States, and a lot of us are looking at globalization, free trade, open market, economics, and there might be a little bit of a retraction from the United States at this point. Looking at the TPP, looking at the Paris Agreement, looking at revising NAFTA, looking more at less multilateral agreements and more bilateral agreements as the direction, which is very opposite than what I'm hearing. And of course, England with Brexit follows in the same footsteps in a sense. How do these shifts in mentality or direction influence your perspective as Belgium on global trade? What are the steps? How are you think? Because I believe you are part of the school that believes in global trade. How would you, throughout this turbulent economic time in a sense, emphasize growth of your exports and your investments abroad? How do you strategize for that to be even more competitive than number 20?
For us, as for Switzerland, it's not even a choice. We believe we are centrally located in the middle of Europe, and it's part of our strength as well. I mean, we are fortunately very well connected. Road infrastructure, gas infrastructure is connected to our neighbors in a way that you probably don't see it much in the world. We have the second port of Europe, so it's just not a question. And for us, the trend is clear. We are not going to make any other choice than believe in the asset and the added value of globalization. And I mean, apart from of course, certain discourse that you hear today, but I think until now also the European course is still going in that direction, and will build on the strength that we have as strong Europe in terms of commerce and investment to keep pushing that trend also globally.
I'll stay with Your Excellency. How's your view on Africa in general? I mean, once again, Africa is probably the richest continent in the world at this point. It is the future. Africa is growing. We have some of the strongest economies or fastest growing economies in the world, Egypt being included, one of them, South Africa is one of the top 3. And we continue to say that there has to be investments that are coming into Africa. There has to be enhancements in Africa. How does Belgium look at Africa as a future for economic growth and more competitiveness? Because if we're going to talk about the principle of globalization, we have to look at the Chinese aspect of things, of being on the ground, physically making investments, being on the ground, transferring knowledge and know-how, and that's how you become more competitive in a global environment. So how do you emphasize that sort of international presence of Belgium in investment and trade?
Our first, investment and commerce is with our neighbors. So we'll have to start there. I mean, I can talk about Africa. I think we'll have to have African ambassadors maybe next year to talk about Africa. But as far as we are concerned, our economy is, of course, linked to the world, and we have very important partnership with US and China, India, and many other partners, including African partners. And definitely we are looking at it. I mean, we have regular, let's say, activities to enhance our partnership, including with Africa. And Africa is definitely part of the focus that we have in terms of expanding the markets and so on. So maybe I want to broaden a bit your question, because I think we're going back exactly to the question that you were raising in the first time in terms of multilateralism. I think the future of Europe is with the world, including Africa, and Africa is also increasing in terms of growth. Our faith is linked definitely because of, I mean, if you see the in terms also of migration, in terms of many other issues that are not, directly, if you focus on only one that you don't see, but all these issues are intertwined. So definitely there is an important element of connection. Yeah,
Your Excellency, Switzerland, when we talk about global competitiveness and Global Trade Matters has been emphasizing this enhancement of the dialogue, very much inspired by what you do in Switzerland, to create the awareness and make people understand that it is extremely important that we perform well as Egypt on these, how can we say, international reports. Then I get another side of the argument where people tell me, listen, these are not the only indications that the indicators that foreign investors look at in assessing a country's economic viability or business viability in a sense. And I totally agree, yes. We cannot say that the Global Competitiveness Index is the only or the best means of assessing a country's performance. And we will see this in our next panel with the Philippines, for example. We will see this with Chile, that there is much bigger economic growth that's happening. What I want to ask Your Excellency is, well, I see a lot of delegations of private sector coming, Swiss private sector companies from large banks to, you know, large food and beverages, many investments. A lot of them were sustained despite the fact that they were having issues after the revolution by not having the ability to transfer their foreign currency. So what I can say is Swiss companies endured at the time of hardship in Egypt and have been resilient and believe in this market. But Your Excellency, when we meet a lot of the Swiss businessmen that come to Egypt, one of the questions that they have, they start referring to the IMF report, the World Bank report, the Global Competitiveness Index. How important, in your opinion, not just for Egypt, but in general, are these international reports in the decision-making process of the Swiss government in supporting investments in countries like Egypt and for the private sector in taking a decision to come here?
Quite an easy question. First, yeah, the Swiss companies have endured difficult years. Actually, the Swiss companies we are talking about are companies that are here since a long time, that have a very strong basis in Egypt, and so there are also huge companies in the world, so they can, you know, they can have 1 or 2 or 3 years that are difficult because they know that there are good perspectives for their market, because the Egyptian market is definitely an interesting market. So that's one point. When it comes to you know, ranking you know, ranking or awards that you get, it's important, but I don't think that is what the investors will look at first. And you know, again, I'm saying, I mean, the state, Switzerland state, is not a very interventionist state when it comes to where companies should invest or in which countries they should invest. I think the companies have to make up their decisions themselves. And what will be very important for the companies to make up their decisions is to see that, you know, the investment climate is good again, that Egyptian investors believe in their economy and are investing again in their economy, and not only in sectors that are non-productive, but in productive sectors. It's important to see that the small and medium enterprises in Egypt believe and receive the necessary you know, support and are working in conditions which is you know, simplifying their life. Because we have the same problem in Switzerland. You know, small and medium companies, they have to cope with the regulations that are for the whole economy, but it's a lot more difficult for small and medium enterprises than for big companies. So definitely the small and medium enterprises will look at, you know, the framework conditions. The new investment law, for example, in Egypt is one of them, but they will definitely look at if is investment going back from the traditional Egyptian investors, private investors, is it going back to the productive sector, and are small and medium enterprises finding the real environment that they need. And you know, we get the interest is increasing. We feel that there is a people now are not anymore at the stage. Oh no, it's Egypt. It's dangerous, difficult. No. That stage. might look good, but you know, they are at this stage and they want to see, you know, if this is happening or not. And one more thing about, you know, if you have to look at the rankings, you know, Switzerland, for example, has a very bad grade in harbors, but it's normal. I mean, we are a landlocked country, so why should we? I mean, we have one harbor in Basel, of course. It's an important one, but it's not where we are going to, you know, to be able to strive in comparison with your countries. So, you know, you have to take that into account. Sometimes you cannot do something, but you have to improve what are your strengths.
This is one of the interesting things, and a lot of the countries that are on the top 20 of the Global Competitiveness Index are actually very small countries. You're talking about Hong Kong, Singapore, Finland, Switzerland. And the ambassador of Singapore, who's not with us unfortunately here today, I always say, you know, Egypt ranks better than Singapore. We're 23 market size, obviously, to almost 100 million people with trade agreements that give us access to billions of millions of people across the market. So this is one of the pillars I'm always very proud of, which is market size. But again, it's not an indicator of whether a country is competitive or not by size. America and China are with us in the top 20 as well. Your Excellency, I'll stay with you on this point, because we always talk when we're talking about Egypt, we're always trying to attract foreign direct investment in Egypt. But one of the most notable things is actually, you know, the Swiss being so bureaucratic to be able to change a law, and we're making an exception for ownership of foreign ownership in Switzerland with Samih Siwiris, with the new project, I think an investment of about $2 billion. We'd like to see more of that. We'd like to see more of Egyptian investments in Europe, especially in the most competitive nation in the world. How do you see that? I mean, again, that $2 billion investment that was done by Siwiris to revive a small town that had its glory back in the days where the King of Egypt used to go and all of these celebrities. And after the military base moved out, it needed to be enhanced. And ironically enough, an Egyptian comes from, you know, building a Gona to a ski resort and investing $2 billion. How do you see more of that happening and encouraging Egyptian businessmen, maybe not at the scale of Samih Siwiris, but on smaller scales, to invest in Switzerland? How would you sell that?
Well, in that precise case of Mr. Sawi, I mean, you can imagine, as you say, a small village and a huge investment coming in the small village. So I understand, yes, that, and as you know, in Switzerland, everything is very decentralized. So I understand a place like this will adapt a bit its regulations so that such an investment is made possible. But of course, within the constraint of the federal law, you have some questions linked to the environment, and so this is something. But and it is not that easy for Switzerland to absorb huge investments, because again we are relatively small countries, very densely built. So in a small village somewhere, it's not that easy to have such big investments. But I mean, of this type. But then you will have big efforts to attract large international companies, because and this also means that some cantons, and this is sometimes where we have an issue with the European Union, and that some cantons, some small states in Switzerland will be able to also adapt their fiscal laws so that they can attract these big companies or big multinational companies. And this is something we have to do all the time, be them Egyptian or American or other. I mean, all the time we need to attract companies in Switzerland. I mean, once again, we don't have the choice. As Sibille was saying, that you know, the US is starting some protectionist measures, but they have a huge market. The US, they are so strong with their internal market, you know, they can allow these kind of measures. I mean, we cannot. I mean, we need definitely investors to be interested in Switzerland, and we would welcome more Egyptian investors. What we get lately is an interest of Egyptian companies to partner with Swiss companies, and this is quite interesting, and sometimes it's a good combination.
Perfect, thank you, Your Excellency. Ambassador Sibille, we are in the center of what we call the education, technology, and financial hub of Egypt, Smart Village. And we are privileged to be in the middle of all of this, and we thought it would be fantastically appropriate to have our event here, because when we talk about competitiveness and global competitiveness, two things that really stand out. The first is innovation. The word innovation might be misunderstood by a lot of people, but at the end of the day, even if it's misunderstood, the meaning is about becoming more competitive, more innovative, more educated, with a creative output in an era of what we call disruptive technologies. Now, Egypt is definitely, despite the fact of having a population, almost 40% are under the age of 30, so there's so much energy there. So with the borderless community that we live in with the internet today, small, medium enterprises, entrepreneurs can access global markets and really make an impact. But we have a long way to go. We have to start with our education system. We have to have the environment for innovation. Belgium does very well in innovation. Europe does very well in innovation. And I think, if I had read correctly, that the European strategy for global competitiveness is emphasized on the innovation. That is your collective strategy for global competitiveness as the European Union. How do Your Excellency see innovation in Belgium, Europe, and around the world? And how can we gain these experiences and share them with our youth? And how can we connect innovative small, medium enterprises and entrepreneurs from Belgium with the young, again, it's not the $2 billion investments that we're looking at. What's really going to drive economic growth in Egypt is micro, small, medium, and innovation and connectivity with partners of the same size.
First of all, of course, everything is about policies. I mean, you have adapted a new investment law, and you can have innovation through enterprise itself. If you allow, also small business to flourish, I think it will help. So it's about a lot of elements have, it's about the framework that you are giving. I think one important element in this framework in terms of favoring research and development, and that it will be important to focus on, is predictability. So I think that's one of the elements, because research and development, for example, you need time. And if you make like a very big, you put a lot of money on the table for research and development, you want to be sure that, you have this 10 or 20 years before you. So I think that's one of the important elements in terms of a framework. A second part, if I take the Belgian example that I think can be inspired of, there are maybe 2 or 3 elements. One of them is the big role played by universities and our partnership with the private sector. I think, the University of Leuven has, for the 3rd time, being ranked first. I'm very proud. But we have a few universities, and they play a very, very big role, but they do not shy away from this partnership with the private sector. I think that's one of the important elements. It's also enterprise among themselves, which partnerships they have, and how you can create actually certain innovation from partners that you didn't think of before. And in that context, a third element is the clusters that have been not created but favored by the state. So again, it's about creating a framework, but the work is not done by the state in terms of giving, and maybe some of the zones that you're trying to create maybe could have this use this base that you have of having a zone in terms of creating these clusters, allowing this creative partnerships to create, to exist and to flourish. And it has given a lot of startups. Sometimes they continue, sometimes they are being swollen, but then new ones come. And I think this is where you can continue, because as we were saying in the beginning, it never stops actually. You always have, and you were saying it about education as well, you always have to keep adapting and to keep innovating, and because the world keeps moving, new challenges are coming. If you take the European perspective, in the very beginning, when we talk about climate change, for example, enterprises saw the measures taken by the EU as an impediment for their growth. If you look at the result today, we have the most competitive enterprise in this sector are in Europe, because they were forced to go further, and today everybody see the need for it. So I think this is one of the very creative and very positive policies that has not only an effect on global warming and global change, but also concretely has a positive impact on enterprises and their competitiveness, where it was not thought of in the beginning. So sometimes creativity comes also from other perspectives than the one that you thought in the beginning.
Absolutely, and I believe we have a tremendous amount of creativity here in Egypt, and a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship that people don't see in a sense, but every kiosk, every little store that sells some orange juice or mango juice that we see is a small business and is quite effective. We see it in all our buildings. We have the structure, but we haven't been able to really support small, medium enterprises and expansion creativity. And that brings me to Your Excellency. When we talk about tying research and development now, unfortunately, one of the biggest mistakes that we do in our funding, our budget, and allocation of our resources here in Egypt, and as Egyptian I can admit this, is that we spend a lot of money on salaries and not enough money on the actual research and development. So, you'll find budgets that go to research and development actually mostly go into salaries and payroll, and I don't want to say the name of the ministry specifically, but I know that their budget by the end of the year, they don't have even money to buy a pencil, yet alone conduct research that can support small, medium enterprises in the private sector. How important is that, tying education to research and development that creates the environment for small, medium enterprises to be innovative? And additionally, research and development does not just help small, medium enterprises in the private sector, but I also think that it helps the government and the policy and the decision makers in formulating the right policy based on that research and development. How do we tie them all three together, Your Excellency, which Finland has done so eloquently? Research and development, how did you do it, and what can we learn from that?
Well, it's first of all, it's part of our whole educational system that research and development is part and parcel of that. All our educational reforms, they are based first of all on research. But it's also this fact that I was speaking before, so that there has to be this connection between the private sector and the universities, educational institutions, and to allocate funds to those sectors where we need it, where the prospects are. And have this, we have lots, like in Belgium, we don't shy away about private sector in educational institutions, in universities, funding research. So the funds have to be complementary. It's not enough that there is government funds for research and development. There has to be also funds in the private sector itself to look forward.
But the majority in Finland is private sector investment in research and development.
Yes.
For their own benefit, of course.
Of course,
yes.
but it's also the benefit of the whole society, because that gives the impetus to the educational institutions to form the people to that direction that are needed in the private sector in the future. So it's a kind of a circle that is needed, so that you don't have just private sector, government sector, educational institutions in one corner. They have to all work
Does civil
together.
society play a role in research and development also in Finland, or we can confine it to the three?
No, there is also civil society and their needs also, and also they raise their own funds to have certain kind of research. So it's part and parcel of the whole society, and that creates also we have a very strong startup culture, and that comes out of this research and development, because when you get the ideas, you can try to build up a startup on that and develop it. And as Sibille said, some of them succeed, some of them don't succeed. But the whole culture that you have the possibility of doing it, that exists.
I thank you. Ambassador Garnier, what I will do is start closing up the panel, because I know that you have other appointments. But if we can just go across, so with a positive message, if we are sending a message to Swiss investors about Egypt, being the ambassador here, what would be your message to Swiss investors about Egypt?
Well, the message is quite clear. We said we need framework conditions, good framework conditions to be able to invest in Egypt. I think the macroeconomic stability is improving. This is clearly something. I mean, there is a huge effort in infrastructure that is going on, so this. You know, and there is, of course, a huge market here. So there are opportunities to be seized, and definitely a willingness from the authority to continue on that path. So we encourage our economic agents to come here. We had a very successful visit of our State Secretary for Economy last December, and she was very happy with what she heard from her interlocutors. So based on that, you know, we tell to the Swiss company, you should come and look at the opportunities, and then try to take your chance.
Thank you, and I did have the pleasure of having dinner with her last December when she came, and I think it was a very, very positive trip that entailed a lot of government entities and a lot of ministries, and I think it's really did reflect the positive attitude of the Swiss government and Swiss businessmen, because we also had the Arab Swiss Business Association that was here. I mean, it was quite a collective group of people with a positive message. Your Excellency, I would ask you the same question. What would the message that we would send to the Belgian investors, small, medium, and large, about Egypt?
The first thing I would say is that actually I don't need to give them a message. They are interested by the Egyptian market. We receive daily questions and questions about, so I think it's known for businessmen and investors in general that Egypt is a very important market, of course huge because of this very big population, but also centrally located with an infrastructure, I mean with Alexandria Port and the rest which is there. So I think the most important now is that, now that we have this this new law, is that we concretely work together in partnership with the Egyptian authorities in implementing it, giving a predictable framework and setting where people can work. And so we will continue this dialogue. We also had a trade mission recently. We have had, I mean, only last week 2 missions of companies that were, one of them was there for a very big investment. So I mean, I think the prospect is there, and it will find its way when both the match is done between what we can offer and what we can find, and the conditions that everybody's looking for in terms of making sure that the investment is responding to a need and protected by the conditions.
That is fantastic, Your Excellency. I mean, since there is so much interest. And I do want to end on a positive note, but still, I have to, I mean, if there's so much interest, will we see that actually translate into investments, or are we still suffering a little bit from some challenges that maybe our policymakers, like our members of parliament, that can make it more attractive for them? So, I know there's a very big interest, but I want to make sure that interest actually does turn into, solid investments. So there are some challenges that are still faced by the private sector, the Belgian private sector, despite the interest? Or do you feel that it's eased a little?
Of course, there are challenges. There are always challenges. Some of them are shared by 90% of the countries of the world. You know, if we talk about red tape, we have our own share. If you're talking about, you know, finding your way in an administration, the various authorities involved. I mean, there are always challenges, and the perfect, you know, market doesn't exist. So you have to take them into account in the thing. But I'm very confident that it's translating, and it will translate more. It has translated in the last year, I think, and definitely with the recent changes that have been done, the confidence is being built, and I'm confident, and definitely if the trend is being kept, that it will definitely translate in investments, yes.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and I direct the last question to you, Your Excellency, on the same topic.
The situation exactly the same in the Finnish firms. There is a lot of interest in Finland, and we get questions all the time. But yes, I have to say that there is also hesitation, and part of it is that well, the news, the world news, and very often the news agencies, they only transmit the kind of negative news about the country. But when I go to Finland, and I usually meet some business entities and so on, and my message is always that if you are interested, do it now. It's now the time. That there is the stability, there's the real commitment to the reforms, there is the market. So what do you wait for now more than that?
I totally agree with you, Your Excellency, especially that we have an influx of investments that are coming in from Asia at this point. I mean, our ambition is to be part of the BRICS. Our ambition is to play an integral role in the One Belt, One Road. So I totally agree with you, Your Excellency. I think European companies should have a little bit more of a risk appetite at this point for them to be able to, how can I say, secure market share in the future when it comes in competing with some of the Asian investors. Your Excellencies, I don't know how to thank you again. It's been such a pleasure, and once again, thank you for your support and your presence and your patience, and for sharing with us your personal and professional opinions on enhancing the competitiveness dialogue, not just in Egypt, but globally as well. I thank you very, very much for your presence. Thank you.